When Caroline Levitt sat down for a university panel, she expected a spirited exchange. But what she didn't expect was to witness a veteran journalist, Daniel Whitaker, unravel live on air. A single loaded remark changed everything, sparking an online firestorm that cost him his career. Was this accountability or cancel culture? The grand auditorium buzzed with anticipation as students, faculty, and journalists filled the rows of seats, all eager for what was expected to be a spirited debate. The topic of the evening, the role of media in shaping public perception, had drawn a diverse audience, from politically engaged students to media professionals. The event was being broadcast live, ensuring that every moment would be captured, analyzed, and potentially dissected online. At the center of it all sat Caroline Levitt, a rising conservative political analyst known for her sharp critiques of media bias. Across from her, Daniel Whitaker, a veteran journalist with decades of experience, was ready to defend the integrity of mainstream news. As the debate's moderator, Professor Elaine Bradford, stepped up to the podium, the energy in the room shifted from excitement to intensity. Caroline had participated in high-profile discussions before, but she could sense something different about tonight. Daniel, with his confident smirk and calculating demeanor, was known for dominating conversations, steering discussions in his favor, and putting his opponents on the defensive. But Caroline wasn't easily intimidated. As the cameras flashed red, signaling the live broadcast had begun, Professor Bradford welcomed the audience, setting the stage for a debate that was supposed to be an exchange of ideas. What no one knew yet was that by the time the night was over, this debate wouldn't just be talked about, it would become a defining moment in modern media discourse. The debate began with a measured exchange between Caroline Levitt and Daniel Whitaker, each presenting their perspectives on the role of the media in shaping public perception. Caroline, calm and confident, outlined clear examples of media bias, pointing to how selective reporting, misleading headlines, and omission of key facts contributed to widespread misinformation. She highlighted cases where mainstream outlets had intentionally framed narratives to fit political agendas, leaving the public with distorted versions of the truth. Daniel, in contrast, dismissed her claims as overblown conservative rhetoric, arguing that mainstream media simply corrects misinformation spread by alternative sources. He insisted that conservative media outlets were the real culprits, pushing false victimhood narratives to undermine public trust in journalism. His tone was confident, borderline dismissive as he leaned into his argument, claiming that what conservatives call bias is actually just responsible reporting. Caroline pushed back, pointing to real-world examples where mainstream networks had made errors that damaged reputations, influenced elections, or even fueled public panic. If these so-called corrections only ever go one way, how is that not bias? She challenged. The discussion, once structured and polite, became more combative as Daniel began interrupting, speaking over Caroline, and shifting goalposts. It was clear he wasn't just here to debate. He was here to dominate the conversation. The tension in the room grew thick, and the audience, both in person and watching live, could sense that this wasn't just another academic discussion. Something was about to give. The debate had been intense, but still within the bounds of a heated intellectual exchange, until Daniel Whitaker took it a step too far. His frustration had been building as Caroline continued to counter his points with well-researched examples, refusing to let him dictate the narrative. Then, as she calmly dismantled yet another one of his claims about media neutrality, Daniel leaned forward, his voice sharper, his patience visibly thinning. "People like you," he said, pausing for emphasis, "are the reason honest journalism is under attack." The words landed like a shockwave. The room, already on edge, fell into stunned silence. The phrase wasn't just aggressive, it carried an undeniable undertone, something loaded, something implied. It wasn't just about conservatives anymore. It sounded personal, divisive, accusatory in a way that went beyond political ideology. Caroline, who had remained composed throughout the debate, didn't react immediately. Instead, she let the silence hang in the air, giving Daniel a chance to realize exactly what he had just said. Then she spoke, her voice steady, her expression unreadable. Would you like to clarify what you mean by people like you? Daniel froze for just a second, a moment of hesitation that the audience caught. He knew he had made a mistake, and now Caroline was giving him the chance to either fix it or sink deeper. The cameras were rolling, the audience was locked in, and Daniel had nowhere to go but forward. But instead of backtracking gracefully, he doubled down. And in doing so, he sealed his fate. The moment Daniel Whitaker doubled down, the energy in the room shifted from tense to electric. The loaded weight of his words had already settled over the auditorium, but now, with Caroline's poised challenge, everyone was waiting to see how he would get out of it. A murmur spread through the audience. Some students exchanged shocked glances, others whispered to one another, realizing they had just witnessed something major. A few reached for their phones, silently recording what they knew would be a viral moment. Even the panelists flanking Caroline and Daniel visibly stiffened, sensing the debate had spiraled into something far beyond its intended discussion. Daniel, visibly aware of the silence swallowing the room, tried to recover. His expression hardened as he forced out his correction. "I meant conservatives, people who claim they're being silenced while controlling the conversation." But the damage was already done. Caroline tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady. "So, just to be clear," she said slowly, "you weren't referring to anything beyond political ideology?" Daniel inhaled sharply, shifting in his chair. He recognized the trap immediately. If he pushed back, he risked confirming exactly what people suspected. If he backed down, he looked weak. The audience sensed his hesitation, and that hesitation was louder than any statement he could have made. The moderator, Professor Bradford, cleared her throat nervously as if debating whether to intervene. But it was too late. The audience wasn't just watching a debate anymore. They were watching a downfall, one that was now impossible to stop. Within minutes of the debate's conclusion, the internet erupted. The clip of Daniel Whitaker's words, "People like you are the reason honest journalism is under attack," spread like wildfire across social media. But it wasn't just the full exchange being shared. Edited snippets surfaced almost instantly, reducing the moment to a 15-second soundbite that left no room for context or defense. Fire Daniel Whitaker and DBF Exposed began trending within the hour as both sides of the political seized the moment to push their own narratives. Conservative commentators blasted Daniel for his condescending remarks, calling them proof of elite media's disdain for opposing voices. Meanwhile, Daniel's defenders scrambled to frame the backlash as manufactured outrage, insisting that his words were being taken out of context. Despite efforts to control the fallout, the damage had already spread beyond the online world. Clips of the moment dominated cable news, talk radio, and podcasts, with pundits either condemning or defending him. Even those who had never followed Daniel's work suddenly had an opinion, because the internet had decided this wasn't just a bad debate moment, it was a defining moment. The university, caught in the storm, issued a vague statement about the importance of open dialogue, but the network that aired the debate, NBS News, had a far bigger problem. Because the controversy wasn't slowing down. As the backlash intensified, the network behind the debate, NBS News, scrambled into damage control mode. At first, they attempted to downplay the controversy, releasing a statement that framed the debate as a spirited exchange of ideas and urging the public to consider the full context of Daniel Whitaker's remarks. But the public wasn't interested in nuance. The clip had gone viral, and the narrative had already been set. Then came the corporate sponsors. Major brands that had backed the televised debate began distancing themselves, with a handful suspending their partnerships with the network. By the following morning, at least 3 key advertisers had pulled out entirely, citing concerns about journalistic professionalism and inclusivity. Inside NBS News, executives were in full-blown crisis meetings. The question wasn't just about ethics, it was about survival. Daniel had been one of their most recognizable faces, but was defending him worth alienating advertisers and the network's audience? Behind closed doors, some argued for standing by him, saying the controversy would fade in a few days. Others knew that the longer NBS waited, the worse the pressure would get. By the afternoon, NBS News made it official: Daniel Whitaker had been placed on indefinite suspension pending an internal review. The announcement was a predictable move, carefully worded to appear measured rather than reactionary, but everyone knew what it really meant. Daniel was being sidelined, and it was only a matter of time before the network cut ties completely. The media world exploded with reactions. Some defended the suspension, saying it was a necessary consequence of his reckless rhetoric. Others condemned it as corporate cowardice, arguing that a journalist was being punished for one heated remark. Inside NBS News, executives worked around the clock, fielding calls from advertisers, legal teams, and board members, all trying to determine the next move. The network had two choices: stand by Daniel and risk prolonged backlash. Cut him loose and salvage their reputation. Privately, Daniel was furious. For years, he had been a top-rated journalist, a veteran in the field, and now a single viral moment had dismantled his career. He called in personal favors, trying to rally internal support, but it was clear no one wanted to go down with him. As he watched the network slowly turn its back on him, one thing became clear: Daniel was no longer in control of the narrative. And for the first time in his career, he was the story. As news of Daniel Whitaker's suspension spread, the public reaction fractured into two opposing camps. On one side, many celebrated it as a long-overdue reckoning, proof that mainstream journalists could no longer get away with their condescending biases. To them, Daniel's comments weren't just a one-time slip, they were a window into how elite media figures truly viewed conservatives. On the other side, critics condemned his suspension as another example of cancel culture gone too far. They argued that Daniel was being punished for a single moment in a heated debate, an incident that, in their view, should have been debated, not weaponized. Some high-profile journalists came to his defense, warning that if someone as established as Daniel could be taken down this easily, no one in media was safe. Social media became a battleground. One viral tweet read, "The same people who claim to defend free speech are now cheering as a journalist is silenced." Another countered, "It's not about cancel culture, it's about accountability. Words have consequences." With both sides firmly entrenched in their views, the controversy had grown bigger than Daniel himself. It was no longer just about one journalist. It was about the future of public discourse itself. Days after Daniel Whitaker's suspension, the media storm hadn't died down. It evolved into a national discussion about media power, free speech, and political bias. Some argued that Daniel's fate was long overdue, proof that mainstream journalists could no longer get away with talking down to half the country. Others warned that his firing set a dangerous precedent, showing that a single viral moment could erase an entire career. For Caroline Levitt, the debate had already moved past her. She had no need to fan the flames. She had let the video speak for itself. Without ever raising her voice or resorting to theatrics, she had exposed the media's bias in real time. She hadn't needed to win the argument. Daniel had done that for her. But the real lesson of the controversy raised a bigger question. Had public discourse reached a point where viral outrage controlled the truth? Was Daniel's downfall accountability, or was it a sign that anyone, regardless of power or influence, could be erased in an instant? As Daniel prepared to relaunch his career as an independent journalist, branding himself as a victim of cancel culture, one thing was certain. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about who controlled the narrative and whether the truth even mattered when perception had already decided the outcome. And in a world where one moment could make or break a career, the question remained, was this justice, or was it proof that no one was safe? The controversy surrounding Daniel Whitaker's downfall reveals a powerful lesson about the fragility of reputation in the digital age. In a world where perception often outweighs reality, a single moment, taken out of context, can redefine an entire career. Daniel's mistake wasn't just a slip of the tongue, it was a reflection of a deeper bias that many believed existed within mainstream media. But the bigger takeaway is this: truth no longer determines the narrative. Viral outrage does. Whether Daniel's suspension was justice or cancel culture, the reality is that public perception dictated his fate, not the facts of the debate. For Caroline Levitt, the lesson was different. Sometimes, the most powerful response is silence. She didn't have to fight. She let the world see the bias unfold in real time. Ultimately, this debate wasn't just about media accountability, it was about who really controls the conversation in the modern age.